Welcome back to Tanstwocents, where we bring unfiltered strategies for real world success in government contracting. I'm your host, Tanwilson, and in today's episode, we're tackling a triple threat facing contractors today: efficiency mandates, regulatory shifts, and budget cuts. And with the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, agencies are under even more pressure to deliver more with less, and contractors are expected to do the same. On top of that, recent changes in federal contracting regulations and a wave of consulting contract cancellations are forcing government contracting professionals to rethink compliance and value delivery. And so, to help us break this down, my guest today is Keith Nakasone, a recognized leader in federal procurement and technology acquisition. And today, we'll explore how these changes have reshaped the playing field and what it means for your business. And most importantly, how to stay competitive when the rules keep changing. Now, Keith and I served on a board of directors couple of years back, and I know you're going to really enjoy our conversation. So, Keith, welcome to our show, and please introduce yourself to our intellectual listeners.
Thanks for having me. Hi, my name is Keith Nakasone. I've been in the federal space for, oh gosh, over 3 decades. So, pretty long career. I retired in 2021. My last stint of time was the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the IT category under Federal Acquisition Services for the General Services Administration. And then I migrated over to working for a software company called VMware, and then eventually launched my own independent consultant business called ProcureTech. And so here we are, going through the process, continue to learn and stay relevant in this time of change. And so I'm happy to be here to discuss all the changes that are going on at this present time.
Yeah, there's not a lack of topics for us to discuss here today. And your background, both in public and private sector, I think is going to be really enlightening for our intellectuals. So I've been really looking forward to speaking with you on these topics. But Keith, before we dive into our discussion, with all the focus on efficiency and accountability lately, it feels like the federal government is trying to run procurement and acquisition like it's a high stakes game of Shark Tank. And if you can't show your value fast enough, then you're kind of out. So, from your perspective, how do you think these priorities have evolved over the years? And how are they influencing decision making today? And are you seeing real change, or is it just buzzwords around the same old process?
Right. So, over the past over 3 decades in the government procurement realm, there's always been changes, right? I mean, we went through major changes, even through even early in my career when we were focused on the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, right? We went through the process
Yeah.
reassessing what do we need to do? What do we need to change? How do we become more efficient as well as adopting technology? And so when we talk about these big changes, organizational change from the workforce perspective to the processes and then the tools we're using is key in this kind of big change, right? And so when we talk about the process of reassessing, it's not just focused on the technology, but it's focusing on the core foundation of the workforce as well as the processes. So what do we do with the workforce? How do we reskill, retrain them to adapt to the change, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, we hear things from the sense of, well, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way
Hmm.
we've always completed the templates and documentation. Well, now I think is the time that you need to reassess, is it still valid? Is it still current? And is it going to move us in the right direction? Right. And this is
Yeah.
not just about the federal government side. This is throughout the public sector as well as private industry. So a lot of these processes and policies have been built around what exists today. I think the real challenge comes in is what do we need to change and how do we become more efficient and effective moving forward?
Yeah. So I think at the root of it, I don't think we are disagreeing on maybe whether or not there should be change or efficiencies. I think it's just the method in which we approach it, which we're never going to see eye to eye on any of that. So,
Mhm.
anyways, it shall be an interesting year, if not the last couple of months so far have proven. So, with that, let's just dive into like our first segment, which is on the top of everyone's discussions, which is DOGE initiatives and procurement impacts. And so, creating DOGE I think was more than just a rebranding effort. It really represents like this clear shift in how the federal government approaches procurement, with a sharp focus on transparency, accountability, measurable outcomes. Again, these are not new words for us. And so for
Right.
contractors, it could mean new compliance requirements, tighter reporting expectations, and potentially even more scrutiny on contract performance. But
Mhm.
there's a lot of buzz around DOGE, about how they're going to streamline the process. Obviously, there's going to be increased oversight at every stage, but I think contractors need to kind of rethink how they're tracking their performance and how they're demonstrating value beyond
Mhm.
just a deliverable or just a button seats type of contract. So, Keith, from your
Right.
experience, how do you see DOGE's initiatives kind of changing the procurement process, as you've mentioned? And like, what practical steps do you think contractors should take on how to kind of align with this push towards efficiency accountability?
Sure. So when we look at the uh, procurement consolidation and the things that they're doing I'm going to kind of hone in on the IT category, right? IT
Okay.
category management on looking at efficiencies and effectiveness. And when we look at common goods and services that we provide the public sector, to include federal, we're looking at the entire ecosystem, right? We're looking at the delivery on what is the mission outcome, how does it support it, and is it really efficient in the way that we're acquiring the common goods and services. So I think what with that executive order of March 20th, where it's talks about the procurement consolidation and how we
Yeah.
are looking at that from a private sector perspective, is what values do you, again, getting back to your core strategic focus. What is the vision? What are you focused on? Are you committed to the public sector in ensuring that that we're adopting commercial best practices within the federal government to make it more efficient? How are we adopting those innovative technologies to better the taxpayer services, et cetera? So I think from a private sector is really reassessing, right? Is the workforce ready and able, have the right skill sets, and are challenging the current processes, the procedures, and things that potentially can be more efficient with the use of technology, such as AI, ML, et cetera, right?
Mhm.
So if when we look at our current workforce and the processes, are we really building in those efficiencies that can be gained, and how do we better utilize our resources moving forward? So I think it's that whole collaborative communication process that we need to ensure that the expectations and that mission outcomes are set in a way where there's an understanding between private and public, and having those active engagements to really have that seat at the table and have those open and discussions so the right
Yeah.
investments can be made by the private sector.
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging. I'm always looking for a silver lining in things, right? When if you're looking on LinkedIn and you're looking at the news, it's all, oh, woe is me, like government's crumbling, like you hear all the horror stories. Yes, I'm
Right.
not saying that there isn't plenty of that. But a silver lining in this too is that I think over like the past decade, I think there's been an increase in public-private sector type of conversations.
Hmm.
And there's certain agents, like certain associations, like the ones that you belong to and I belong to,
Right.
like ACT IAC, CCAF, AFCEA. There's always been a really big push in having a public-private sector type of
Hmm.
dialogue, and I think it's only going to grow,
Right.
under this administration. But you said something kind of interesting too, is, from a technology and a people and a process perspective, it's not an either or. It's not a trade off where one is more important than the other. It's an and. It's,
Mhm.
like technology and people and processes,
Right.
which is, I think, where people kind of fall short when they're looking at some of these changes and efficiencies, that it's an or, that it's a technology that can
Mhm.
do this instead of type of scenario.
Right, right. And with the adoption of, like just say when RPAs were introduced, right, robotic process automation, when that was first introduced, it was how the skill sets of the workforce need to change and adapt, right? Because from an awareness perspective, when you use those types of technology, you have to understand, you're looking for, is there patterns? Is there, is the output correct? From the accuracy perspective. So what things need to be in place from a job skill perspective to ensure that there is, if there's any kind of corrective action, if there's things that they need
Mhm.
to change from an automation perspective, those key skills for the data or the what I call the digital capabilities, those skill sets really need to be embedded in the workforce. And from the process perspective, do we need to change the process, re-engineer the process, or do we need to eliminate it,
Right.
right? So when we look at from a resource perspective, it's all interconnected. You can't do one without the other. And this is
Yeah.
where, that holistic view and the leaders from leading change, right? Building coalitions and all of those executive core qualifications come into play of making these huge, what we call big change that's going to happen in government as well as in the private sector. How do we make those decisions more rapidly and leverage innovation in a more efficient manner?